and welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Lorraine Goldbloom. How are you, Lorraine?
Great. How you doing?
Good, good. Thanks. Thanks for coming on to the episode today.
A
It'll be
pleasure.
very interesting to speak with you. Now, just a little bit in terms of your background. You grew up in the New York tri-state area. You've got a
Hmm.
passion for theater, and you studied performance at NYU's Tisch School of Arts. And you
That's
worked as
right.
a professional actor, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah, that was the vision, that was the plan. And I love theater. I love doing theater and did it for many years.
oh wow, okay. Do you still do it from time to time, or is that a
No,
passion?
there really isn't time with my the teaching schedule and the work that I do now. It became sort of a very natural transition. I was sort of exploring human character in one way through theater, and now I'm sort of exploring it in another way through the work that I do now.
Sure. And in sort of keeping with the bio for yourself, you became a Reiki master and started, learning and teaching energy healing, which has led you into vortex healing, right? Which is
Yes.
something that you do and you're a teacher of as well.
Yes, yes. Actually, Vortex Healing, it was one of the first things that I started to study. Um, when I took this interest when I sort of first became a seeker. I was doing yoga and I was exploring a lot of different things, reading different books, listening to different teachers, and I kind of just stumbled into Vortex Healing. And I was impressed with it, and it piqued my interest in energy healing in general and what was possible in the world and what were people really doing out there. So I, took that class and enjoyed it and continued taking classes. And while I was continuing to take vortex healing classes, I was studying other things as well. And, I continued to study Reiki and many other different things. It sort of opened a whole world up to me about, some of the wonderful things that are going on and work that people are doing.
Okay, amazing. So just, in sort of for our listeners, if we can just start with the very basic sort of approach to vortex healing. So what is vortex healing in like your definition?
Right. Well, vortex healing is a healing modality. It's a healing modality that, goes after what ails you. It goes after issues, really, because that's usually what we look for when we look for healing: physical issues, emotional issues, psychological issues. So on one level, it's a healing modality with a very practical approach. It gives you results on that level. On a deeper level, when we really begin to explore what's behind our issues, we really can get into working with the separation consciousness that keeps those issues alive. Our issues keep us out of being present. That's my definition of an issue. It's something that keeps you out of being present. It keeps you in pain. It keeps you distracted. And vortex healing, as it works on the conditioning and the expression of the issue, it also works on the consciousness that keeps that issue alive. So as we continue to work on that, we uncover deeper levels, and we can really work with vortex healing and experience it as an awakening process, not just a healing modality. So on one level, as I often talk about it and demonstrate it as I'm doing healings and such, it's a healing modality, practical application, practical results. On a deeper level, it's really a lineage about awakening and uncovering the truth of what you are, when you can get all of the separation consciousness out of the way and really be present, coming back to that truth.
And why is the word vortex used in this modality?
That's a good question. It's because when you take the foundational training, you receive what we call a transmission. And the word transmission, I believe it has a background in Buddhist terms, but it's not unlike the word attunement in Reiki. It's sort of the passing on of the ability from facilitator to student to do the work. And in vortex healing, during the class, students receive a energetic consciousness structure that we call the Vortex Wheel. We call it the wheel because if you were to look at it psychically, it's something that sits in the heart and it looks like a circle. But what it really is more of a cross section of a multi-dimensional structure that's shaped more like a vortex, if that makes sense. It's sort of a cross section of a structure that's shaped like a vortex. So it looks like a wheel from our point of view, but the deeper nature of it, it has this vortex-like quality in the way that it moves and directs energy. So that sort of became the name of it, because that's how it initially works. And that vortex becomes the access point for the tools that you get in the foundational class.
Got it. You know, again, for some of our listeners who are trying to visualize this, a vortex is equivalent to sort of like a whirlwind or a maelstrom. So if you look at, you know,
yeah, I usually use props when I'm talking about this live. But if you have something shaped like an ice cream cone, a vortex, it's a way, you see it in many different contexts because it's a way of directing energy. It creates a kind of focus and movement to give more focused power to the movement of energy. So you see it in different contexts all the time. And it spins, sort of like the way that a fan, moves air to concentrate the flow. The vortex sort of concentrates the movement of the energy to make it more focused in a particular way.
Yes, and you can imagine a whirlpool where you've got the water circling in a clockwise direction, coming to a central focal point, sort of like the eye of the hurricane. So,
yeah, and it creates a focus for the work, and it becomes the bridge because to be a channel, I'm not channeling my personal energy to someone else. We become basically an instrument for the source of the work, and that vortex becomes the bridge from the source of the lineage, the source of the healing, through my system or through a practitioner's system into whoever they're working on.
Got it. So you're taking the energy from the source, which is the outside, is whirling inward into that.
Yeah, the source of the lineage is really a divine presence. It's a divine consciousness. And we refer to the term Merlin. And there's a lot of confusion around the term Merlin, because as soon as I say the word Merlin, you think of the Merlin in King Arthur, with the hat, the wand. Remember, he had a hat that looked like a vortex. But when I'm talking about Merlin, I'm not talking about that particular character. The term Merlin has actually become a title throughout history, a title of someone who has worked with this divine presence. And so really, when I'm talking about Merlin as the source of this lineage, I'm talking about a direct expression of the divine, an avataric expression of the divine that has a particular quality. And in this case, the quality that we work with, that actually does the healing and is the source of the awakening, is a quality of magic, the quality of magical transformation. And that's kind of where we get our reputation as being a very magical lineage.
Yes, I have heard of, Merlin sort of in the context of transference healing and, in terms of that connection. So what would be a practical example of vortex healing? So if someone has an ailment, if you could describe maybe, what that ailment is. And basically how...
Yeah, I mean, usually, my background is when I was starting to study Vortex Healing, I was working as a personal trainer and yoga instructor. So, Of course, I started using it on knee issues, shoulder issues. I started using it on physical stuff because that's where I was coming from, both, in myself and clients that were open to receiving this kind of work. And it impressed me because I got very practical results. That's kind of where I come from. I'm a practical person. I kept coming back because it worked, honestly. And when I first studied it, it was really billed as a healing modality, and it grew in popularity because of its results. But it also works on, as issues express themselves in multiple ways. Issues are complicated. A good issue is going to have a physical expression. It's also going to have an emotional expression. It's going to have a psychological expression. So if you take an issue like depression, which is a great example, there's going to be a physical expression of that. There is going to be an emotional expression of that. There's going to be different ways it shows up in the physical body, the chakra system, the energetic pathways. So for a modality to work, it has to address that. It has to get into the physical body and all of the different places of the energy system that is conditioned by the issue. We use that word conditioning, right? It has to be able to release that conditioning, and then it has to work on the glue that holds all of that together. You know, that place where we get identified with the issue, where we see it, you know, as an expression of ourselves. You know, we don't just say, oh, I'm experiencing depression. We say, I am depressed. So we have sort of the energetic part of the work that goes in to address the practicalities of the conditioning in the physical body and the system. And then we have the consciousness component that goes in and gets that consciousness glue that, you know, unravels that experience we have that we are our issues, and that's what we are. And so it works on all of those levels. And even those very upfront practical physical issues, the knee issue, the shoulder issues, very often have this deeper kind of glue that holds them together. So for a healing modality to really work effectively, it has to get this other level as well. It just has to. And that's where we really began to explore, well, you know, what are our issues made of and what keeps them alive and what holds them together? So the work has become sort of this ongoing exploration of healing, you know, of the energetic anatomy, what it's made of, how it works, and then how we can sort of awaken through that, how we can let go of our issues and really be present.
Got it. So say, for example, like you mentioned, with depression, the sort of like physical recognition would be if someone is slouching or slumping because of the depression, and the emotional sort of response would be sadness because of that. But then Vortex Healing is
trying something like that.
Yeah, just as an example. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. You know, you have the slumping, the slouching, you have fatigue. Very often there's body ache, there's lack of focus. There are a lot of things to depression, and, you know, they show up, you can see them in the physical body. And if you're sensitive, you can track them in the energy system as well, and the pathways in the chakra system and the different energetic bodies. And of course, the emotional expressions are numerous. There's, of course, sadness, but there's isolation, there's hurt, there's resentment. You know, we talk about our issues as if they're just sort of nicely lined up in a row, that they're separate, but they support each other, and they kind of they're entangled. And so as we begin to work on something as complicated as depression, we begin to unravel all of this other stuff. And then we just sort of follow that thread and keep going.
Yes. And it's important, like you say, not to identify with these outer layer symptoms, right? Of, say, slouching or, you know, being in a sad state and, you know, becoming those symptoms. And then with Vortex Healing, you're trying to get into these deeper layers. Does Vortex Healing automatically get into the deeper layers, or you have to sort of do some sort of investigation?
It does. I mean, it's designed to support being present. So one of the things about our issues is that they create identity. That's part of what an issue is. That's part of the glue that holds it together. We experience it as ourselves. As we said, even our language reflects, you know, we don't say, oh, I'm experiencing depression. We say, I am depressed. It's sort of becomes part of our way of being. So part of the healing is the Vortex Healing tools, the energetic and the consciousness tools come in to unravel that, to break that identity. And the moment that we can realize that I am not my depression, it's just something I experience, that goes a long way towards the healing. That creates distance, and we can work on that issue more objectively and, of course, more effectively. And then we just keep going. Once we can actually see something as an issue, we're rolling. You know, we got space around it. We can continue to work on it. We have the tools. Probably the issues that hold us the most deeply are the issues that we don't even recognize that we have. Because we're so identified with them, we don't even see them as issues. Oh, that's just the way I am. Like I used to sort of be somewhat of a melancholy person. I didn't see myself that way, but it was just, oh, well, that's the way I am. I'm not just one of those happy people, until one day through a vortex healing, I realized, no, I'm actually not melancholy or sad. I just have an issue about sadness. I have this unresolved grief in my system, and I can work on that, and it can be different. And the moment that I saw that was a huge moment of transformation for me. And it changed everything. Just being able to recognize it, and then recognizing that there are tools that you can work with to release that and let it go.
Yes. And, like speaking of, getting into the underlying layers, especially with something like consciousness, which essentially is, awareness as well. Why do you think, or do you have any thoughts on this? By default mode, it seems that humans are very sort of tunnel vision, maybe it's to the ego. We are, focused in the present, but the wrong kind of present. It's just, what we're maybe attuned to at the time, visually or, audibly. But it's really through the influence of, maybe music or psychedelics, or reading, those particular books, or following certain, mentors or gurus, who speak about consciousness, that we become more aware of the underlying layers of consciousness, and we don't sort of act on a surface level. We tend to take a more holistic view. Do you think that humans are sort of like, that's the default mode, is to be in tunnel vision? And if so, why is that?
That's a great question. I think that in a way, the human form is designed to experience ourselves in separation. There's this idea you have, that they say, they who are wise, right? Say, oh, it's all one. It's all one. And that is a lovely idea. It's a lovely concept that I think we all would like to believe. But practically speaking, our experience is that I have my own body. You have yours. I am clearly separate from you. We're two different things. We have two different minds. We have two different lives experience. So the whole human form, the body, the physical body, the energy system, the localized consciousness, which is what we're talking about, mind and personal experience, is designed for an experience of separation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, for whatever reason, the divine, the one, seems to want to have this experience of playing in separation. And so it created these complex human beings that have all this stuff going on. The problem is when this localized form, when I experience pain, an issue, and I get identified with it, and I suffer. And that suffering really comes not just from the pain itself, but the identification with the pain. That's when we begin to start asking questions. That's when we begin to think, oh, could there be something else? What about this? If it's all one, then how can I be experiencing such great personal pain? And then we become seekers, and we begin to explore, and how could it be different? We begin to break our identification with our localized pain and our experience and I call it separation consciousness, that holds the issues together. And then we begin to recognize that we are actually not separate from the rest of creation. We are just designed to have an experience of separation. And that's a huge difference. And that's how I talk about the awakening process, which is awakening to the fact that we were never actually separate from everything and everyone around us. We were just in an experience of separation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so that connectedness that we're longing for has always been there. We just haven't been able to recognize it because we have been so distracted by our issues. And so the deepest sense of presence comes from being able to put all of that down and really just be in that moment. And that's why you mentioned music earlier, and the power of that. I know that, you were a musician, that because something like that brings us really in the moment of how we're feeling and how we're responding to that moment. That nowness of everything is key. And to be able to sustain that and live from that is the awakening process. So the healing in that sense becomes an awakening when we can really keep putting down the things that keep us in distraction or pain or issues and live in that nowness consistently. That is the awakening process. So when I talk about healing, the ultimate healing becomes an awakening. The ultimate awakening becomes a healing. They're very intertwined in vortex healing, if that makes sense. Why, does the divine go through this game of, creating separation through human form? And, your guess is as good as mine. We all speculate as to why God, the divine, seems to play this game. All we know is that we're in it and we're looking to come home.
No, definitely. And, it's very true, because you're making that distinction with separation from God. And once again, we're not talking about, God as the man in the sky. We're talking about God as, the divine source, the original form. And, my theory, again, it's speculation, like you're saying, we don't know for sure, but it's, because I don't think God can experience, certain things as God. You have to sort of separate and become human to get that experience, because it's almost like a catch-22. And, like someone like Paul Chek, who says the opposite, humans can, become God because they come from, God. It's just that once you become God, you won't know you're God, because at that point you have to let go of your ego. So again, it's the catch-22 with that, right? And
there's always, there's sort of an absolute point of view that we can always guess at. And then there's the personal point of view. And so, we start from where we start from. And we all we know is that we're in this experience, and we know that there's more. And there's this innate desire to come home to that. And so we start by working with the stuff that's in our face, getting that out of the way. And the more space and the more presence there is, we're reminded of the truth that's already there. And this is where language just gets so difficult, isn't it? Because just by, talking about the one or talking about God, you put yourself in this sort of conceptual subject-object conversation. And whatever truth is, it's so much deeper than that. So this is where it becomes a very intimate, personal exploration.
Definitely. And you can't describe God by, using the word God. That doesn't do it justice.
Right.
It's something just to latch onto in the interim. And, it's sometimes sad to see that so many people, like you're saying, they identify with the wrong things, maybe with the symptoms, or, they go off the beaten path. They go down a rabbit hole, and, this can cost them their whole life because, they weren't aware enough, or they did not have that, holistic view. And even for me, like you were mentioning music earlier, music for me, it actually, kept me grounded unconsciously. And not just music, people are sort of involved in the arts by its very nature, it does that. But personally for me, it took things like getting into a little bit of psychology and philosophy just to sort of intellectualize the separation and, sort of become, aware purposefully, like, look, there is a separation going on. It's not just, surface level, stuff that's happening. You have to take a step back and not get attached to, the present moment in the incorrect way. Otherwise, you are going to go down, that beaten, path. I remember a book I think it's Feeling Good. Just in the opening chapters when they talk about depression, they say, and again, I'm not trying to, make depression something that's very easy, but one of the common mishaps of depression is just getting into that downward spiral, that vortex of depression that's going negatively.
Yeah, the hopelessness. Yeah,
and just spiraling into that, where you could have just broken it off if you were a little bit more aware, taken control of your will and say, okay, let me try to alter the course that I'm heading off, because you've realized you're going onto this course, right? Whereas some people, they don't even know they're on that course, right? And that they're spiraling. That awareness is so important.
Right. Well, I think one of the wonderful thing about, the arts, music, whatever it is there's a level of surrender You recognize that you're, expressing something greater than yourself. And so it is very grounding in a way. And there's also a level of surrender that's built in there, because whatever comes through, it's more than the ego and the personality can really take ownership for, you know what I mean? So, in true work, there is that surrender, that there's something greater than yourself. And that's what kind of brings hope to hopelessness. It's like there's got to be something more. And to me, magic is when that unknown touches you in such a personal, intimate way, that it can't be a coincidence. It's got to be something greater. And that reminds us of the bigger picture. It brings hope. It reminds us of magic, of the divine, of surrender. All of that stuff comes into play. So, that stuff is always there. If we can just stop and put our issues down long enough and look around, we can see it. But our issues are so distracting. They're designed to distract. That's their function. And so it's so easy. And we all get caught up in those issues. And so we have something, fortunately, to work on it. We can meet that where it is. We can say, okay, I'm not going to judge this issue. I'm not going to judge this depression. I'm going to meet it. I'm going to meet it with love, and we're going to work on it. And in that way, our darkest moments can become a gateway to the divine. They can actually be our path back home if we're willing to really meet them with compassion and love.
Yeah, love is so important because, love is consciousness, right? Consciousness came out of love. This is my theory.
Yeah.
And I've got a very sort of, at least today, a contrarian approach to the arts because, before it was about performance. And if you were a composer, getting your music out there. But personally for me today, art for me is something that you do quietly within your own limits, and you offer that to the divine. Yeah. And you don't involve money in it. You don't involve business because that'll bring into politics and, things like that. And, if someone sort of views your art, that's great, but as sort of like a secondary feature. Like there is some art that I do that is just for myself and the source. I don't share it or, I don't involve money or business. I just keep it to myself because I find that maintains, again, philosophically, the highest purity of the art. It's not tainted by any external influences like, money, business, you should write it this way because it'll sell more songs, etc. It's just something like you're saying, it's done so that you can surrender and offer it. And the feeling is very different from, when you do it the traditional way.
Sure, absolutely. And, true art is more of an expression, than a performance. It's so easy. I mean, the ego can take hold of anything, can't it? And in those moments when we recognize we are getting caught, to be able to stop and say, okay, this is not really the context that I can work on in integrity. So let's do what we need to do. Let's go back to the place where we feel in integrity, find that truth, what really wants to be expressed through me. That's what it means to be an instrument. That's what it means to be a channel for art, for vortex healing, for anything. We become a channel. We have that surrender to divine intention working through us. So however we can come back to that, we do. We do that work and just honor that process and be grateful that we can participate in it in that way.
And in sort of, in today's times, the work you're doing with vortex healing as a process and as a modality, is it something that is evolving, or is it something that this is all it is and ever can be and just will be used?
Oh, it's absolutely evolving. It's evolving very quickly as we continue to, as I use the word exploration, we're always, seeking out issues and finding different ways that the body and the human energy system hold on to stuff. And, new classes are being created. Other classes are being shortened because we can do things more efficiently. It's an ongoing living lineage. I think it has to be. Because once you stop asking questions, things become stagnant. So it's amazing how quickly, it's evolving, and people are interested not just in vortex healing, but people are interested now in awakening. A lot of people, 20 years ago, the way that we were speaking sounded very weird, but now you have all these wonderful teachers talking about awakening, Eckhart Tolle and Adyashanti, talking about awakening as opposed to separation consciousness. A lot of these ideas are becoming more mainstream, and people are resonating with a lot of the things that we're talking about. And so that adds momentum to the transformation. And so it just keeps changing. It's really very, troubling times, but very exciting.
And it's almost like, the adage of, I think it's the old story of the richest man in Babylon. You go out, finding the riches, only to come back home and find it's been in your own backyard for, all this time.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
Well, that's amazing. Thanks very much for, coming on the episode and sharing your thoughts and, some of the technology behind the.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a pleasure to meet you.
No, for sure. And if people want to get a hold of your work, where's the best place they can reach you?
My website, LorraineGoldbloom.com, has all the information. I'm having an energetic anatomy course coming up in January through the New York Open Center, as well as the foundational in March. And I'll have a lot of free healing events leading up to that. Because, the best way for people to get a sense of the work is to have a direct experience of it to receive a healing. So I'm often doing events very accessible online to give people a healing. So I'll be doing one January 14th, February 1st, March 2nd. You can keep an eye out for that, as well as my Facebook page where I do occasional free healings as well.
Okay, amazing. And I'll put these in the show notes as well so people can track it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks again, Lorraine, and I wish you well.
All right. Take care.